I was rushing to work, so I grabbed my husband's phone by mistake. As soon as I boarded the train, my white sister-in-law called, and the very first thing she talked about was Marcus Babe, the $400,000 transfer from Maya's business account cleared into my offshore company. Thanks for forging her signature. And do not worry, Jamal still thinks this baby is his. When are you making Maya sign the house over? I simply silenced the microphone and smiled. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family that tried to destroy everything you built. The morning started like any other frantic Monday in Atlanta. I am Maya, 32 years old, and the founder of a luxury culinary empire that caters to the city's most elite circles. Running a multi-million-dollar business means my schedule is calculated down to the second. I was already running 10 minutes behind for a major tasting event in Buckhead. I grabbed my coffee, snatched what I thought was my black smartphone off the kitchen island, and sprinted out the door toward the MARTA station. My husband Marcus had been in the shower. He is a financial consultant who loves wearing custom suits and pretending his family name pays our bills. We have the identical phones with the identical black cases. It was an honest mistake, but it was the mistake that saved my life. I slid into a seat on the train, catching my breath as the doors chimed shut. The city flashed by the windows. I tapped the phone screen to check my email, but the lock screen showed a picture of Marcus and his older brother Jamal on a golf course. I rolled my eyes, realizing I had grabbed the wrong device. I knew his passcode. It was our anniversary. I unlocked it, intending to quickly call my assistant from his phone to let her know I was running late. Before I could even open the keypad, the phone vibrated violently in my hand. The caller ID flashed a name that instantly made my stomach turn. Chloe. She is Jamal's wife. A fragile white woman who thrives on playing the victim and making sure everyone knows she married into a prominent black family. She has spent the last 4 years treating me like the hired help. I hit accept, bringing the phone to my ear. I opened my mouth to tell her Marcus left his phone at home, but she did not even say hello. Her voice came through sharp and breathless with excitement. Marcus Babe, it worked. The $400,000 transfer from Maya's business account cleared into my offshore company this morning. I froze. The train rattled along the tracks, but the sound completely faded away. My blood ran ice cold. I did not breathe. I did not speak. I simply pulled the phone away from my face and pressed the mute button on the screen. Then I pressed the speaker icon, holding the phone in my lap as Chloe continued her barrage of betrayals. I cannot believe you pulled off that forged signature so perfectly. Chloe laughed, a grating sound that echoed in the quiet train car. We can finally put that food truck girl back in her place. Your mother is going to be so thrilled when you take half of her little catering company in the divorce. She always said you should have married a Spellman girl instead of someone who smells like frying oil. My hands gripped the edges of the phone. Food truck girl. That was how my mother-in-law Vivian and the rest of them saw me. They completely ignored the fact that I had built a $20 million logistics and catering empire from the ground up. To them, I was just the girl from the South Side who did not belong at their country club dinners. But Chloe was not finished. Her next words were a dagger aimed straight at her own husband. And do not worry about the timeline, babe. Jamal still thinks this baby is his. He is so clueless. Once we drain Maya dry, we can finally be together without hiding. Just make sure she signs the house over to you before the audit hits her. She was pregnant with Marcus's child. My husband was having a baby with his brother's wife. They were stealing $400,000 from my life's work, framing me for a tax disaster and planning to leave me homeless. A weaker woman might have screamed. A more naive woman might have unmuted the phone and cursed her out. I did neither. In the brutal world of business, you do not throw tantrums, you gather leverage. I kept the phone on mute and minimized the call screen. My fingers flew across the glass. I opened his banking application. Marcus was arrogant enough to use Face ID, but I knew his backup PIN was the same as his phone lock. I typed it in. The screen loaded, revealing the hidden accounts he had never told me about. There it was in plain text. A massive wire transfer pending approval from my corporate account, routed through a joint account I did not know existed, straight into a shell company registered in Chloe's name. I took a screenshot. I swiped to his photo gallery and found a hidden folder. Inside were dozens of explicit photos of him and Chloe, along with screenshots of the forged loan documents bearing my copied signature. I selected every single file. I opened his email, attached the images and the banking screenshots, and forwarded everything to my secure encrypted business cloud server. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen. The train was slowing down, approaching the next station. Send. The confirmation tone chimed softly. Just as the files vanished into my secure server, the phone screen suddenly went black. A spinning wheel appeared. Marcus had realized his phone was missing. He was using his laptop to execute a remote factory reset, desperately trying to wipe the evidence before I could find it. But he was exactly 2 minutes too late. I had everything. The train hissed and jerked to a halt. The doors slid open with a loud mechanical clatter that snapped me back to reality. I looked up through the glass windows of the station platform. Standing right there, drenched in sweat, his custom suit wrinkled, and his eyes wide with absolute panic, was Marcus. He had tracked the device location and sprinted down the street to chase the train down. He pounded his fists against the glass doors before stepping inside the car, breathing heavily, scanning the rows of seats. He was searching frantically until his terrified eyes locked onto mine. He looked at the black phone resting quietly in my hands, unaware that it was now totally empty. He thought he could erase his sins with a click of a button. He thought he could steal my crown and leave me with absolutely nothing. He had no idea that the war had just begun. I pulled into the private parking garage of my Buckhead facility just as the morning prep shift hit their stride. The air inside my 20,000 square foot commercial kitchen was a symphony of precision. Searing Wagyu beef roasting garlic, the sharp clatter of stainless steel. This was my kingdom. I built it. I bled for it. I bled for it. I bled for it. The repetition in my mind matched the rhythm of my pounding heart. I took a deep breath, smoothing my tailored blazer, and walked into my private glass-enclosed office. I barely had time to set my bag down before the heavy door violently swung open. Marcus stormed in, his chest heaving, his designer tie yanked loose. He slammed the door behind him. The panic in his eyes had been replaced by a carefully manufactured outrage. He backed me against my desk. "Are you out of your mind?" he barked, his voice vibrating with a harsh, aggressive edge. "You stole my phone. You took my property, walked out of our house, and got on a train. What kind of psychotic behavior is this, Maya?" I looked at him. The man I had shared a bed with for 4 years. The man who constantly criticized my long hours while secretly funding his lavish lifestyle with my sweat. He was trying to gaslight me aggressively, shifting the blame to mask his own absolute terror. It was a calculated performance. I picked up the identical black smartphone from my desk and held it out to him by 2 fingers. "I grabbed it by mistake, Marcus. We have the exact same phone case. I realized it on the train and was trying to call you from it, but the screen went completely black. It looks like it factory reset itself." Marcus snatched the device from my hand. His thumbs mashed the power button. The setup screen appeared, asking for a language selection. A massive visible wave of relief washed over his face. The tension instantly left his shoulders. He genuinely believed his remote wipe had worked in time. He thought his secrets were safe. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was untouchable. His posture instantly changed from a panicked suspect back to the arrogant husband I knew too well. He adjusted his suit jacket, regaining his false composure, and glared down at me. "You need to be more careful, Maya. I have highly sensitive financial data for my top-tier clients on that device. Do you know the kind of liability you just exposed me to? If you were not so disorganized and constantly smelling like a deep fryer, maybe you would pay attention to what you grab in the morning." I kept my face completely blank. "I am sorry, Marcus. I will be more mindful." He smirked, satisfied that he had successfully put me back in my place. But before he could launch into another lecture, the office door swung open again. Vivian strolled in her designer heels, clicking sharply against my polished concrete floors. She was wearing a matching tweed suit and an expression of pure disgust. Right behind her was Chloe holding a massive designer tote bag that I now knew was purchased with my stolen money. Chloe wore a pastel maternity dress that intentionally accentuated a bump she barely had. Vivian dramatically pinched the bridge of her nose. Lord have mercy, it smells like raw onions and desperation in here. I do not know how you breathe this air every day, Maya. Good morning, Vivian, I said smoothly. Do not use that tone with me, Vivian snapped, inspecting a framed award on my wall with open contempt. We are not in the projects anymore. Marcus brought you into high society, so you need to act like it. My friends at the country club are already whispering about how much time you spend in this warehouse. It is highly embarrassing for our family name. Chloe stepped forward, placing a pale hand protectively over her stomach. Marcus, babe, the smell in here is making me nauseous. Can we make this quick? I do not want to stress the baby. Marcus immediately softened. The harshness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sickening tenderness. Of course, Chloe. Sit down. Take deep breaths. He pulled out my expensive leather guest chair and guided her into it. I watched my husband cater to the woman carrying his child right in front of my face. The absolute audacity was staggering, but I kept my hands folded neatly on my desk. I watched. I learned. I remembered. I remembered the pain. I remembered the disrespect. I remembered every single microaggression. Vivian turned her condescending glare back to me. We are here because Chloe and Jamal are finalizing the details for the gender reveal party next week. The entire local chapter of Jack and Jill will be there. The mayor is stopping by. It needs to be flawless. I smiled tightly. Congratulations to Jamal and Chloe. I am sure it will be a lovely event. It will be, Vivian said, planting both hands on my desk. Because you are going to cater it, and you are going to do it for completely free. I raised a single eyebrow. For free, Vivian, a custom menu for 200 high-profile guests requires a massive budget. Chloe let out a soft, fragile sigh. Maya, please. You know Jamal and I are saving for the new baby. We are family. I thought you would want to support us. Or is it just too hard for you to be around a successful pregnancy? The room went dead silent. Chloe played the fragile, innocent victim to absolute perfection, wrapping her vicious racial and class-based insults in a sugary, sweet tone. Vivian crossed her arms. Chloe is right. Since you cannot seem to give my son an heir, you can at least make yourself useful. You will provide the food, the staff, and the cleanup. Just drop the food at the back door, sweetie. Do not mingle with the guests. We do not need anyone asking questions about your lack of pedigree. Marcus looked at me, a silent warning in his eyes. Do it, Maya. It is for my brother. It is the least you can do. They were standing in my $20 million facility, demanding free labor from a woman they viewed as a glorified maid, all while the man I married was funding his mistress with my stolen cash. I looked at Vivian, then at Chloe, and finally at Marcus. I let a warm, highly submissive smile spread across my face. You are absolutely right, Vivian. Family is everything. I would be honored to cater the gender reveal. I will personally handle the menu. It will be an event nobody in Atlanta will ever forget. Chloe beamed, clapping her pale hands together. Oh, thank you, Maya. I knew you would understand your place. Vivian scoffed, turning on her heel. Make sure the crab cakes are hot this time. Come along, Chloe. Let us leave her to her grease. Marcus gave me a patronizing pat on the shoulder as he followed them out. Good girl, he murmured. I stood completely still, listening to the heavy glass door click shut. I waited until I saw Marcus and his luxury sedan pull out of the parking lot. The submissive smile vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, calculated focus. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my actual phone. I dialed the private number of my corporate attorney, Nia. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you have good news, Nia said, her voice sharp and ready for battle. I walked over to the window. They just handed me the murder weapon, I said, my voice steady. They want me to run the entire event at the mansion next week. The same mansion Chloe just bought with my stolen money. Let us pull the financial records. We are going to burn them all to the ground. Sunday morning arrived with the stifling humidity typical of Atlanta in late August. It was matched only by the suffocating atmosphere of the Oak Trace Country Club. This was Vivian's sanctuary. It was a place where old money mingled with new money, provided you had the right last name, the right bank account balance, and the right college pedigree. I walked onto the veranda, wearing a tailored emerald green jumpsuit that screamed quiet luxury. Marcus walked 2 steps ahead of me, eager to join the table where his mother held court. Vivian sat at the head of a long table overlooking the manicured greens. She was surrounded by 3 of her closest socialite friends. Jamal sat to her right, looking completely exhausted. Chloe sat next to him, sipping sparkling water and looking like a delicate porcelain doll. I took the only empty seat at the far end of the table. Marcus immediately engaged in a loud conversation about stock portfolios with Vivian's friends. He was trying desperately to sound like the financial genius he constantly pretended to be. I ordered black coffee and kept my silence. My mind was running through the financial documents Nia and I had pulled just days before. The $400,000 was gone, but the trap was perfectly set. I just needed to play my part. The pleasantries did not last long. Chloe adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and let out a dramatic, trembling sigh. She shifted in her seat, physically shrinking away from my direction. She placed a manicured hand over her chest. Jamal immediately leaned in, asking his wife what was wrong. Chloe's eyes welled up with perfectly timed tears. She looked at the other women at the table, her voice shaking with manufactured fear. I just feel so unwelcome right now. Maya has been glaring at me ever since she sat down. I can feel the hostility radiating off her. It is so aggressive. I am pregnant, Jamal. I cannot handle this kind of hostile energy. It is not safe for the baby. The entire table stopped talking. Every head turned toward me. The angry black woman trope was Chloe's absolute favorite weapon. She used her fragile white woman tears to paint me as a physical threat without me ever uttering a single word. I had literally been staring at my coffee cup. Jamal slammed his hand on the table. His protective instincts were activated by a baby that was not even his. Maya, what is your problem? Chloe is carrying my child. If you cannot sit here and be civil, you need to leave. I looked up, keeping my face entirely passive. I have not said a word to your wife, Jamal. Vivian scoffed, swirling her mimosa. Her wealthy friends watched with hungry, judgmental eyes. You do not need to say a word, Maya. Your body language screams ghetto. I met my mother-in-law's gaze. Excuse me? Vivian leaned forward. Her voice carried across the veranda for neighboring tables to hear. Maya, you need to fix your tone. We aren't in the projects anymore. You might be used to fighting in the streets, but Marcus brought you into high society. He gave you a respectable name. You need to act like it. It is exhausting having to constantly apologize for your lack of class. You should be taking notes from Chloe on how to carry yourself with grace. The blatant disrespect was staggering. She was erasing my $20 million company and reducing me to a stereotype. She was elevating the white woman who was secretly sleeping with her favorite son. Marcus sat there slicing his eggs, Benedict absolutely silent. He let his mother humiliate me in front of Atlanta's elite because it fed his fragile ego. He needed them to believe he was my savior. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I did not raise my voice. I did not react. I simply smiled. The waiter arrived moments later carrying a silver tray with the leather check folder. The brunch bill for 8 people at Oak Trace was astronomically high. He placed it discreetly near Marcus. Marcus casually flipped the folder open. He reached into his pocket, patted his chest, and gave a rehearsed look of mild annoyance. Ah, man, I left my primary card in my golf bag in the locker room. Give me a second, let me go grab it. He was stalling. I knew for a fact his primary card was completely maxed out. His secondary accounts were currently frozen by the automated fraud alert I had triggered with the bank. He had absolute zero liquidity. He was hoping Jamal or Vivian would step in and cover the $2,000 bill to save him the embarrassment. Do not worry about it, darling, I said. My voice was smooth, cutting through the awkward tension like broken glass. I reached into my purse, pulled out my solid titanium black Amex, and dropped it onto the silver tray. The heavy metal hit the tray with a loud, authoritative clack that made everyone at the table physically jump. "Please put the entire table on this," I told the waiter. I handed him a crisp $100 bill as a personal tip. "And keep the change for your excellent service." The waiter bowed and rushed off. Vivian's wealthy friends stared at the heavy black card. Their eyes widened with sudden, undeniable respect. They knew exactly what kind of financial power that piece of metal represented. Marcus turned bright red, his jaw clenching in absolute humiliation. He had just been emasculated in front of his peers. He was exposed as a man whose wife casually covered a massive bill he could not afford. Chloe's face turned an ugly shade of blotchy pink. Her fragile victim routine had been completely overshadowed by my financial dominance. Furious at being upstaged, she stood up abruptly. Her chair screeched loudly against the polished stone floor. "Since you love spending money so much, Maya, you can cover my gender reveal party next week," Chloe announced loudly. She made sure every wealthy family at the tables around us could hear. "But do not think you are on the guest list. Just drop the food at the back door, sweetie. Don't mingle. We do not want your kind ruining the aesthetic." I looked at her, then at Marcus, feeling the satisfying weight of the trap closing. "I will see you at the back door, Chloe." I drove away from the country club feeling a profound sense of clarity. Paying that brunch bill was a tactical strike, but it was not the war. The war required dismantling the very foundation of their pretentious dynasty. To do that, I needed to break the weakest link in their chain. I needed to break Jamal. I knew a simple conversation would never convince him of their betrayal. He needed to see it, and I needed to plant the seed of doubt so deeply that it would consume him. Jamal was the golden child, the brilliant surgeon who supposedly could do no wrong. But his entire identity was wrapped up in being the perfect patriarch of an elite African-American family. He was completely blind to his white wife's manipulations and utterly devoted to his younger brother. When I returned to my office, I accessed the encrypted cloud server holding Marcus's digital footprint. Among the thousands of files I had extracted on the train, there were detailed billing statements from an ultra-exclusive fertility and reproductive clinic in Midtown Atlanta. Chloe had not just gotten pregnant by accident. She and Marcus had actively engineered this betrayal, using my husband's private credit card to cover the exorbitant consultation and procedural fees. I printed the itemized receipts, blacking out my own name and any tracking data. I paired the receipts with a glossy, high-end brochure from the exact clinic. I grabbed a bright yellow sticky note and wrote a single devastating sentence. "Ask Chloe why Marcus paid for her visits." I sealed the documents in a nondescript manila envelope and paid a private courier to deliver it directly to Jamal's surgical suite at Emory University Hospital. I made sure it was marked strictly confidential. Then I went home, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and waited for the explosion. It happened just after 8 o'clock that evening. Marcus was sitting on the velvet sofa in our living room, pretending to read a financial magazine when the front door flew open with enough force to rattle the hinges. Jamal stormed into our house, his scrubs still on under his designer overcoat. His face was a mask of absolute fury, his chest heaving as he marched directly toward his brother. He slammed the manila envelope onto the glass coffee table. The glossy fertility clinic brochure and the itemized receipts spilled out across the pristine surface. Marcus dropped his magazine. He looked at the documents, and for a fraction of a second, I saw the sheer terror flash across his eyes. It was the same panic I had seen through the train doors, the raw fear of a rat caught in a trap. But Marcus was a seasoned liar. He had spent his entire adult life faking his financial success, and his survival instincts kicked in with terrifying speed. "What is this, Marcus?" Jamal demanded, his voice shaking with a dangerous mixture of anger and desperation. "Explain to me why your credit card information is attached to my wife's fertility treatments. Explain to me who sent this to my office." I sat quietly in the armchair across the room, my legs crossed, watching a masterclass in gaslighting. Marcus let out a long, heavy sigh and rubbed his temples, perfectly mimicking the body posture of an exhausted, misunderstood brother. "Jamal, you need to calm down," Marcus said, keeping his voice incredibly soothing and measured. This is exactly why Chloe did not want to tell you. She was terrified you would react exactly like this. Tell me what Jamal shouted, his hands balling into fists. Marcus stood up and placed a steadying hand on his older brother's shoulder. Bro, listen to me. Chloe came to me crying a few months ago. Her boutique was failing. She was drowning in vendor debt and she was too ashamed to ask you for money because you already pay for her entire lifestyle. She needed a quick cash injection to keep her suppliers from cutting her off. I gave her a short-term business loan. I hid the transaction because I promised her I would protect her pride. Jamal stared at him, the anger in his eyes warring with his desperate need to protect his perfect marriage. Then why are there receipts for a fertility clinic? Marcus chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. The clinic charge was a mix-up. I let her put her initial IVF consultation on my card to get the reward points, and she paid me back in cash from her boutique sales the very next day. Jamal, look at the dates. Look at the numbers. Does this look like an affair, or does this look like an accounting favor between family? Someone is clearly trying to frame us. Someone who wants to destroy this family. It was a brilliant sociopathic lie. It capitalized on Jamal's arrogance and his desire to believe his wife was just a little bad with money rather than a treacherous villain. I watched Jamal's shoulders drop. The tension left his body. He wanted to believe the lie. He needed to believe the lie because the alternative was facing the fact that his entire life was a humiliating joke. Jamal turned his head slowly, and his eyes locked onto me. The desperation in his gaze instantly morphed into a fiery, misplaced rage. You did this, Jamal accused, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. I did not flinch. I did what Jamal I asked calmly. You are so incredibly bitter. Jamal sneered, stepping toward me. You are so jealous that my wife is carrying the next generation of this family while you sit around smelling like a kitchen. You hired a private investigator to dig into our finances. You fabricated this entire package just to cause stress for a pregnant woman. You are pathetic, Maya. I looked at my brother-in-law. He was a brilliant surgeon, a man of science and logic, yet he was completely blind to the rot inside his own house. He was choosing to attack the black woman who had built her own empire rather than question the white woman who was actively destroying his lineage. If you ever come near my wife again, Jamal threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious growl, I will bankrupt your little catering company. I will sue you for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. I will make sure you never serve another meal in the city of Atlanta. Do you understand me? Marcus stood behind Jamal, offering me a look of profound, smug satisfaction. He had won. He had manipulated his brother perfectly, turning Jamal into a human shield. I understand you perfectly, Jamal, I said, keeping my voice soft and perfectly even. I am sorry for any stress this has caused you and Chloe. Please take the documents. I want absolutely no trouble. Jamal snatched the papers off the coffee table, gave me one last look of absolute disgust, and stormed out of the house. Marcus waited until the door slammed shut before turning to me with a dark, victorious grin. He did not say a word. He just adjusted his tie and walked into the kitchen, confident that his secret was permanently safe. I remained in the armchair, the silence of the living room pressing heavily against my ears. Jamal's threats echoed in my mind. He wanted a lawsuit. He wanted to protect his fragile reality and defend the very people who were stabbing him in the back. I realized then that a quiet confrontation would never work. Piecemeal tactics and anonymous envelopes would only give Marcus room to spin more lies and manipulate the narrative. I could not save Jamal privately. I could not protect this family from behind closed doors. If they wanted to treat me like a villain, I was going to give them a performance they would never recover from. I had to stop playing games. I had to burn the whole house down with everyone inside, and the gender reveal party was going to be the perfect place to strike the match. I did not sleep a single wink that night. While Marcus snored comfortably in the master bedroom, completely oblivious to his impending destruction, I sat at my kitchen island with my laptop open and my mind racing. Jamal's blind allegiance to his brother and his treacherous wife proved that dealing with this family internally was a massive waste of time. They were perfectly content to protect their pristine social image at the absolute expense of my sanity and my bank account. If I brought them proof of the affair, they would close ranks, protect Marcus, and label me a crazy, jealous wife. I needed a force much larger and much more unforgiving than the court of family opinion. I needed the federal government. At 8 in the morning, I was sitting across from my corporate attorney, Nia, in her sleek downtown office. The heavy mahogany desk between us was covered in printed banking statements and wire transfer logs. Nia had a predatory gleam in her eye as she slid a thick stack of federal affidavits toward me. If we file this as a marital financial dispute, it goes to civil court and gets tied up in a messy, drawn-out divorce proceeding, Nia explained, tapping a manicured fingernail against the documents. Marcus could argue that, as your husband, he had implicit permission to move funds. But if we file this as an unauthorized fraudulent transfer by an unknown entity, it instantly becomes a federal matter. We do not name Marcus. We simply report that $400,000 was stolen from your commercial business account via identity theft. It was a brilliant, flawless strategy. Marcus had used a forged digital signature to authorize the transfer from my corporate account to a newly formed LLC registered under Chloe's name. By officially reporting the theft to the bank's fraud department, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Internal Revenue Service, I was taking the power out of Marcus's hands. The federal investigators would trace the IP address of the computer that authorized the wire. They would follow the digital paper trail directly to Chloe's boutique account. Marcus was not just committing adultery. He had committed wire fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. I picked up the heavy brass pen and signed my name on every single dotted line. I swore under penalty of perjury that the funds were stolen. I handed the paperwork back to Nia and watched her seal the envelope. The federal trap was officially set. 48 hours later, the jaws of that trap snapped shut with breathtaking speed. I was standing in the center of my commercial kitchen overseeing the massive prep work required for Chloe's upcoming gender reveal party. The hypocrisy of preparing artisanal crab cakes and imported caviar for the woman who stole my money was not lost on me, but I found a dark, satisfying humor in the process. Every perfectly plated appetizer was just another prop for the grand finale. The heavy glass doors of my office violently swung open for the second time that week. Marcus stormed inside, and this time he was not faking his panic. His face was a ghastly shade of gray, a stark contrast to his crisp navy suit. He looked completely unhinged. He practically sprinted toward me, completely ignoring my staff, who paused their chopping to watch the spectacle. Marcus grabbed my arm, his grip entirely too tight, and pulled me into my private office, slamming the door behind him. He was sweating profusely. A single bead of moisture tracked down his temple, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. "I need $20,000 in cash right now, Maya," he demanded, his voice dropping to a frantic, breathless whisper. "Open the business safe. I know you keep liquid cash for vendor emergencies. Hand it over immediately." I calmly pulled my arm out of his grasp and took a deliberate step back. I looked him up and down, taking in his absolute desperation. "Why on earth do you need $20,000 in cash on a Thursday afternoon, Marcus?" "There is a glitch with my wealth management portfolio," he snapped, waving his hand, as if swatting away an annoying insect. "It is a stupid banking error. I was at the jewelry store trying to buy Chloe a push present for the party to smooth over that ridiculous fight with Jamal. My black card declined. Every single secondary card I have declined. The manager literally cut up my card in front of the entire showroom. It was humiliating, Maya. I am not going to be embarrassed over a banking glitch. Open the safe." He still possessed the sheer, unadulterated arrogance to demand my hard-earned cash to buy diamonds for his pregnant mistress. He had treated my business as his personal ATM for years, always masking his demands behind the guise of temporary cash flow issues with his high-end investments. I looked at him, letting my eyes widen in a perfect Oscar-worthy imitation of absolute panic. I grabbed a stack of printed emails from my desk and stood up intentionally, letting my hands tremble. "Marcus, I was just about to call you," I said, my voice rising in manufactured hysteria. "I cannot open the safe. I cannot access any of the corporate accounts. We have absolutely no money." Marcus froze. The arrogant demand died on his lips, His eyes darted from my face to the papers in my hand. What do you mean you cannot access the accounts, Maya? What did you do? I did not do anything, I cried out, pressing my hands to my cheeks. I got a call from the bank fraud department this morning. They froze everything. The primary operating account, the vendor lines of credit, the payroll accounts, all of it. They detected a massive unauthorized wire transfer of $400,000 that happened last week. Marcus actually stopped breathing. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I pushed the printed bank notice directly into his chest. He grabbed it automatically, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. I had to report it, Marcus. I continued, my voice perfectly conveying the terror of a confused, innocent wife. $400,000 just vanished into thin air. The bank escalated it immediately. They brought in the Federal Trade Commission for identity theft. And because it is a commercial account, the IRS launched a random immediate audit of all our business and personal finances. The federal agents are tracing the wire right now. They said they will know exactly what IP address authorized the transfer and exactly whose bank account received the stolen funds by Monday morning. I watched his eyes scan the bold red letters of the bank notice. He saw the words Internal Revenue Service. He saw the words Federal Investigation. I watched the devastating realization crash over him like a tidal wave. He knew the feds would trace the transfer directly to his laptop. He knew they would trace the destination directly to Chloe's boutique. He was no longer dealing with a disgruntled wife. He was staring directly down the barrel of a 20-year federal prison sentence. Marcus fled my office like a man who had just seen his own executioner. He did not ask any more questions. He did not demand the cash. He simply backed away, his face pale and slick with sweat, before turning and practically sprinting out of the building. He knew the federal government did not play games, and he knew his digital fingerprints were all over that stolen $400,000. Less than 24 hours later, my phone buzzed with a mandatory summons from Vivian. She demanded a United Family lunch at the Oak Trace Country Club. She claimed she could sense the tension between Jamal Marcus and myself, and as the matriarch, she was ordering us to sit down, break bread, and restore the peace. It was a thinly veiled excuse to maintain her illusion of absolute control over her perfect wealthy family. I agreed to attend. I needed to see how Marcus was behaving under the crushing weight of the impending audit, and I needed to keep my enemies comfortably close. The atmosphere at this country club dining room was predictably suffocating. Marcus sat rigidly next to me, staring blankly at his untouched salmon. He looked like he had not slept in days. Jamal sat across from us, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between Marcus and me with lingering suspicion from the fertility clinic brochure I had anonymously sent him. Chloe sat beside Jamal, radiating a smug, untouchable energy. She clearly believed she had won. Marcus had undoubtedly lied to her about the frozen accounts, probably spinning some tale about a temporary banking error to keep her compliant. Halfway through the excruciatingly silent meal, I stood up, excused myself politely, and walked toward the ladies' lounge. The country club bathroom was a masterclass in excessive southern opulence. Gilded mirrors lined the walls above imported marble vanities. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive jasmine diffusers. I turned on the gold faucet and let the cold water run over my wrists, taking a deep, steadying breath. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me. I looked up into the mirror and saw Chloe standing there. She reached behind her back and slid the brass deadbolt into place, locking us inside. The sweet, fragile, pregnant victim persona vanished in an instant. The mask completely slipped off her face, revealing the vicious, calculating woman beneath. She crossed her arms, her pastel maternity dress suddenly looking absurd against her hardened posture. "You think you are so smart, Maya?" Chloe said, her voice dropping its usual breathy pitch, replaced by a harsh, grating sneer. "You think throwing a little tantrum and causing banking issues is going to change anything? Marcus told me you locked the accounts out of spite? It does not matter. You are just delaying the inevitable." I slowly reached for a linen hand towel, drying my hands with deliberate precision. "Is that what he told you, that I locked the accounts?" "Do not play dumb with me," Chloe snapped, taking a step closer. The pristine lighting caught the furious glint in her eyes. I know exactly what kind of game you are playing, and you are going to lose. You were never anything more than a bankroll to him, Maya. You are a placeholder. Did you honestly think a man like Marcus, a man from this kind of family, was ever going to settle for a woman who spends her life smelling like raw meat and garlic? He despises your little catering business. I turned around to face her, leaning casually against the marble counter. My silence only infuriated her more. She wanted me to scream. She wanted me to break down in tears. She wanted to feel the absolute power of destroying my life. Marcus loves me, Chloe declared, stepping right into my personal space. He has loved me since the day we met. This baby is his true heir, not Jamal's. And as soon as I deliver this child, Marcus is filing for divorce. He is going to take his legal half of your $20 million company, and he is going to leave you with absolutely nothing. We are going to build our life on the foundation of your sweat, sweetie. You are funding my family. I looked at her pale, contorted face. The sheer magnitude of Marcus's lies was almost impressive. He had convinced this woman that he was entitled to half of a business he never contributed a single dime to. He had convinced her that their future was financially secure, entirely omitting the fact that federal investigators were currently tracing his felony wire fraud right to her boutique's doorstep. They were both living in a spectacular, deeply pathetic delusion. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. You can have him, Chloe. But I promise you neither of you is walking away with a single penny of my money. Chloe's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. She realized I was not going to give her the satisfying dramatic reaction she craved. She realized her words were not breaking me. So she immediately shifted to her most lethal weapon. Watch me, she whispered. Chloe reached up with her perfectly manicured hands and violently yanked her own hair, tangling the blonde waves into a messy bird's nest. Then she dug her fingernails into her own forearm, dragging them down hard enough to leave bright, angry red welts across her pale skin. She looked at me, her eyes wide and suddenly brimming with entirely manufactured terror. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs, and let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream. "Help me!" Chloe shrieked at the top of her lungs, banging her fists against the locked wooden door. "Somebody help me! She is crazy!" She fumbled with the deadbolt, threw the door open, and stumbled out into the plush hallway of the country club. I followed her at a calm, measured pace, walking out just in time to see her collapse dramatically against the hallway wall. Jamal and Vivian were already sprinting out of the dining room, followed closely by Marcus. Patrons from nearby tables stood up, their wealthy faces pale with shock. Jamal caught Chloe as she slid toward the floor. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing with violent theatrical gasps. "What happened?" Jamal yelled, looking wildly down the hallway. "Chloe, what did she do to you?" "She attacked me!" Chloe wailed, pointing a trembling red welted arm directly at me. "She cornered me in the bathroom. She grabbed me. She said she was going to kill me, and she said she was going to kill my baby. Keep her away from me, Jamal." Jamal's face contorted with absolute, unadulterated rage. He gently handed Chloe over to Marcus, who was staring at me with a mixture of horror and confusion. Jamal lunged forward, closing the distance between us in 3 massive strides. He looked ready to physically tear me apart. "You violent, psychotic animal," Jamal roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. But before Jamal could reach me, Vivian stepped directly into my path. Her face was a mask of absolute aristocratic fury. The internalized classism and racial disdain she had harbored for me since the day we met finally boiled over. She did not hesitate. She did not ask for my side of the story. She simply raised her hand and struck me. The slap was incredibly loud. The sharp, stinging crack of her palm against my cheek silenced the entire hallway. My head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the blow. The skin across my left cheekbone burned with immediate pulsing heat. The country club hallway went dead silent. The wealthy patrons watched in breathless horror. Chloe peered out from behind Marcus's shoulder, a tiny, triumphant smirk, briefly touching her lips before she hid her face again. Jamal stood frozen, shocked that his mother had delivered the physical blow for him. I did not raise my voice. I did not raise my hand to strike her back. I slowly turned my head, locking my eyes entirely on Vivian. I reached up with my right hand and gently touched my stinging cheek. With my left hand, I reached down, tapped the digital face of my hidden smartwatch to hit record, capturing the dead silence and the hostile breathing of the people standing before me. I hope you remember this exact moment, Vivian. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, because it is the last time you will ever touch me, and it is the moment you lost absolutely everything. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving Vivian standing in the country club hallway with her hands suspended in the air. The physical sting on my cheek faded within minutes, completely replaced by a cold, burning anticipation. The next 4 days were a masterclass in silent execution. I did not speak to Marcus. I did not acknowledge his presence in our house. I did not react to his increasingly frantic phone calls with his so-called wealth managers. I simply prepared. Saturday morning arrived with bright, cloudless skies, the day of the gender reveal. My fleet of matte black catering vans pulled into the expansive circular driveway of a sprawling, newly constructed estate in Milton. It was a massive brick and stone monstrosity boasting 10,000 square feet of unearned luxury, towering columns, and an Olympic-sized pool. This was the house Chloe had just purchased. This was the house my stolen $400,000 had secured. My staff moved with absolute military precision. Dozens of chefs, servers, and event coordinators swarmed the property, unloading equipment and ingredients. We transformed the expansive backyard into a high society wonderland. Giant cascading arches of pink and blue pastel balloons framed the multi-level terrace. Crystal champagne flutes caught the afternoon sun, waiting to be filled. Custom floral centerpieces draped elegantly across long tables covered in imported silk. I directed the entire operation from the massive state-of-the-art chef's kitchen. I chopped, I plated, I orchestrated, I owned this kitchen, I owned this staff, I owned this moment. The irony of the situation was deeply intoxicating. Vivian had demanded I stay at the back door like the hired help. Chloe had demanded I not mingle with the guests, treating me like a peasant invading her royal court. They desperately wanted me invisible, completely unaware that I was the only reason they had a roof over their heads to celebrate under. The guests began arriving at 2 o'clock sharp. Local politicians, prominent business owners, and Vivian's wealthy country club friends filled the backyard with loud booming laughter and the constant clinking of glasses. I watched them through the expansive kitchen window. I watched them toast. I watched them celebrate. I watched them revel in a manufactured fantasy built entirely on my stolen labor. I was meticulously plating a tray of miniature lobster and caviar tarts when the heavy swinging kitchen door slammed shut. Marcus stood there. The panicked, desperate man from my office was gone. The impending federal audit had clearly pushed him past the point of fear and straight into a sociopathic survival mode. He reached behind him, locked the door, and aggressively yanked the blinds shut completely, cutting us off from the catering staff buzzing in the hallway outside. He walked toward me. His shoulders squared, his jaw tight. The mask was completely off. There was no more gaslighting about accidental phone swaps or temporary business loans. There was only cold, hard malice. "You really think you can play games with me, Maya?" he sneered, stepping so close I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. "You think freezing our accounts and hiding behind some phantom bank audit is going to stop me? You think you can starve me out of my own money? I am Marcus Jenkins. I do not get starved out. You are nothing but a stubborn, ungrateful weight around my neck." I placed the silver tray on the marble counter. I wiped my hands on my pristine white apron and looked him dead in the eye. "I am keeping my business secure, Marcus. Your business." Marcus laughed. It was a loud, ugly, hollow sound that echoed off the stainless steel appliances. "That is where you are completely wrong." He stepped directly into my personal space, pointing a rigid finger at my chest. "I am filing for divorce on Monday morning. I already retained the most vicious litigator in Atlanta, and I am taking exactly what is owed to me. I am taking 50% of the catering company. I am taking 50% of the commercial property. I am taking half of every single dollar you have ever made. I stared at him, letting his vicious words hang in the heavy air. He wanted half. He wanted half of my blood. He wanted half of my sweat. He wanted half of my tears. You did not build a single thing in that company, I said quietly, keeping my voice dangerously level. You never worked a single hour in that kitchen. I made you who you are. Marcus spat, his face inches from mine. You were absolutely nothing before you met me. I brought you into this world. I gave you the elite connections. I gave you the wealthy clients who eat your overpriced food. Without my family name, you are just another girl from the South Side scraping by. The courts will see that I was your primary investor in social capital. You owe me half, Maya, and I am going to bleed you entirely dry. He turned around, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt, and unlocked the kitchen door. He paused and looked back over his shoulder. Have the dessert table ready by 4 o'clock. Chloe wants the reveal done before the mayor leaves. The door swung shut, leaving me alone in the quiet kitchen. I did not cry. I did not scream. I walked over to my leather tote bag resting on the center island. I pulled out my secure iPad and unlocked the screen. I opened the encrypted legal file Nia had sent me late the night before. It was the official real estate closing documents for the property I was currently standing inside. I scrolled down to the buyer information. The property was registered to an LLC named Pastel Dreams Holdings. I scrolled to the financial disclosures. The down payment matching the purchase exactly to the cent was a wire transfer of $400,000. I looked at the routing numbers. They were identical to my frozen commercial accounts. I tapped the screen, highlighting the final page. It was the articles of incorporation for the LLC. The primary beneficiary and sole owner of the property was listed in bold black ink, Chloe Jenkins. I looked up from the glowing screen, gazing through the kitchen window at the massive backyard. Marcus was currently handing Chloe a glass of sparkling cider, kissing her cheek tenderly, while Jamal proudly rubbed her pregnant belly. Marcus thought he was divorcing me to take half my company. He thought he was taking my money to build a new, perfect life with his brother's wife. He had no idea that I already held the deed to his absolute destruction. He had no idea that the federal government was already preparing the indictments. I set the iPad down, picked up the tray of lobster tarts, and pushed through the kitchen doors. It was time for the party to begin. The noise of the party hit me the second I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors. It was a wall of sound. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes, the bright artificial laughter of Atlanta's high society, the low thumping bass of the jazz trio playing on the far end of the terrace. I stepped into the blinding Georgia sunshine, the heavy silver tray of lobster tarts perfectly balanced on the tips of my fingers. I carried the silver tray. I carried the weight of their lies. I carried the $400,000 secret. I carried the absolute knowledge that every single brick of this massive estate was paid for with my stolen money. I carried it all perfectly balanced, moving through the crowd with the invisible grace of the hired help. This was Marcus and Jamal's world. The manicured lawn was packed with chief of surgery directors, prominent defense attorneys, and real estate tycoons. They wore pastel linen suits and designer sundresses, oblivious to the rot beneath their feet. At the center of it all stood Vivian. She was holding court by the infinity pool, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a blindingly white pantsuit. She was parading Chloe around like a prize-winning mare. Chloe had one hand resting delicately on her slight baby bump, accepting congratulations and fawning compliments with a sickeningly sweet smile. I walked past them. I did not break my stride. I offered a lobster tart to a city councilman. I offered a tart to a venture capitalist. I smiled at the politicians. I smiled at the lawyers. I smiled at the people funding their delusions. The smile was my armor. The smile was my weapon. Vivian spotted me immediately. Her eyes narrowed, cutting through the cheerful facade she was projecting for her wealthy friends. She excused herself from a conversation with a judge's wife and intercepted me near the outdoor bar. She did not look at my face. She looked at my tray, treating me exactly like the catering staff she believed I was. Maya, Vivian snapped, her voice low and sharp, designed to carry only to my ears. You are hovering. I did not hire your company so you could mingle with my guests. Take those appetizers to the mayor's table near the garden, and then go back to the kitchen and stay there until it is time to cut the cake. Do not make me remind you of your place again today. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had slapped me across the face just days prior. I looked at the woman who was aggressively defending a pregnant mistress while standing on stolen property. I understand perfectly, Vivian, I said, keeping my tone flawlessly polite. I will make sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve. I turned away before she could process the weight of my words. I did not go to the kitchen. I did not retreat. I scanned the crowd, my eyes moving over the sea of pastel clothing until I found my target. Jamal was standing alone near the edge of the stone patio, staring out at the lake. He looked terrible. He was holding a glass of sparkling water, his knuckles white from gripping the glass too tightly. The tension in his jaw was visibly pulsing. He was a man drowning in his own manufactured reality. He was desperately trying to maintain the image of the proud father-to-be, but the cracks were showing. The anonymous fertility clinic receipts I had sent to his office were still eating him alive. The country club bathroom incident was still playing on a loop in his mind. He was a brilliant surgeon, a man of logic and science, and his logical brain was violently rejecting the lies his family was feeding him. I set my empty silver tray down on a passing waiter's cart. I picked up a fresh tumbler of bourbon on the rocks, Jamal's preferred drink, and walked quietly toward him. I stopped beside him. He did not turn to look at me, but I saw his shoulders stiffen. I am not supposed to be speaking to you, Jamal muttered, staring straight ahead at the water. My mother wants you gone. Chloe is terrified of you. You need to walk away before I have security escort you off the property. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I simply held out the glass of bourbon. You look like you need a drink, doctor, I said softly. Jamal finally turned his head. He looked at the bourbon, then looked at my face. He was searching my eyes for malice, for the crazy, violent woman his wife claimed I was. He found nothing but absolute freezing calm. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before reaching out and taking the heavy crystal glass from my hand. As his fingers wrapped around the glass, I slid my left hand smoothly and expertly into the side pocket of his tailored linen suit jacket. I dropped a small metallic dual-port flash drive deep into the silk lining. For your eyes only, doctor, I whispered, stepping back instantly so the transaction remained completely invisible to the partygoers behind us. Do not show your brother. Do not show your mother. Look at it now. I turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd before Jamal could even open his mouth to ask a question. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly what he was going to do. Jamal was a man obsessed with finding the truth hidden beneath layers of tissue. He could not ignore a diagnosis. I walked back into the kitchen and watched through the window. I saw Jamal set his bourbon down on the stone railing. I saw him slip his hand into his pocket and pull out the tiny silver drive. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, looking over his shoulder to ensure Vivian and Chloe were deeply distracted by the jazz band, Jamal quickly walked away from the patio, slipping through a set of French doors into the mansion's private first-floor study. Inside the quiet oak-paneled room, Jamal locked the door. He pulled out his smartphone. The flash drive was equipped with a USB-C connector. He plugged it directly into the bottom of his phone. A single folder popped up on his screen. It was titled The Diagnosis. Jamal tapped the screen. Two files appeared. One was a video file, the other was a massive PDF document. He opened the video first. It was the unedited raw security footage I had pulled from the country club's discreet hallway cameras paired with the crystal-clear audio recording from my smartwatch. Jamal watched the screen in the dim light of the study. He watched his wife Chloe lock the bathroom door. He heard her voice dropping its sweet pitch to a vicious sneer. He heard her say, "Marcus loves me." He heard her say, "This baby is his true heir." Jamal's breathing stopped. He watched in absolute paralyzed horror as Chloe reached up and violently ripped her own hair. He watched her drag her fingernails down her own arm, intentionally clawing her own skin. He watched her fake a blood-curdling scream, unlock the door, and throw herself into the hallway. And he watched me standing completely still. my hands resting calmly on the counter, never having touched a single hair on her head. Jamal's hands began to shake violently. He backed up until he hit the edge of a leather sofa, collapsing onto the cushions. His entire reality shattered in the span of 60 seconds. He closed the video with a trembling finger. He opened the PDF document. It was a complete unabridged export of every single iMessage exchanged between Marcus and Chloe over the past 14 months. The extraction I had pulled from Marcus's laptop on the train. Jamal scrolled down. His eyes scanned the text. He read Marcus telling Chloe how much he despised his marriage. He read Chloe demanding more money for her failing boutique. He read the explicit graphic details of their hotel rendezvous that occurred while Jamal was performing marathon surgeries. And then he found the messages from 3 months ago. He read Marcus authorizing the $400,000 wire transfer. He read Chloe celebrating the purchase of the mansion they were currently partying inside. He read Marcus promising to divorce me, take half my company, and raise their baby together in this very house. Jamal sat in the dark study, clutching the phone as if it were a live grenade. Outside the window, the jazz band played a cheerful, upbeat tempo. The sound of his mother and his brother laughing floated through the glass. They were celebrating a child that belonged to his brother. They were celebrating in a house stolen from his sister-in-law. They were celebrating his complete and utter destruction. The late afternoon sun cast a long golden glow across the stolen Milton estate. Out on the terrace, the jazz trio played their final upbeat chords, signaling a shift in the afternoon's rhythm. The ambient chatter of Atlanta's elite quieted down as the event coordinators began ushering the guests toward the massive infinity pool. At the edge of the water stood a custom-built acrylic stage flanked by towering arrangements of white roses and peonies. Behind the stage, an enormous high-definition LED screen was positioned to broadcast the big moment. I stood by the primary serving station, my hands resting lightly on the cool linen tablecloth. I watched the crowd part like the Red Sea, as Marcus strode confidently toward the stage. He had completely shed the terrified, sweating persona from my office. He was back in his element, wearing his arrogance like a tailored suit. He picked up the silver microphone from the stand and tapped it twice. A sharp, clear sound echoed across the manicured lawn. "Welcome, everyone," Marcus announced, his voice smooth and dripping with practiced charisma. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate the expansion of the Jenkins family legacy." The crowd offered a warm, polite round of applause. Vivian stood in the front row, beaming with absolute matriarchal pride. She was flanked by a state senator and a prominent neurosurgeon, perfectly positioning herself at the absolute center of high society. Marcus smiled, his white teeth flashing in the sunlight. He reached out and gently pulled Chloe onto the stage beside him. She looked the picture of radiant, innocent motherhood in her flowing pastel dress. Marcus wrapped his arms securely around her waist, his hand resting dangerously close to her stomach. It was a blatantly intimate gesture disguised as brotherly affection. "We are here today to honor my incredible brother Jamal." Marcus continued, his voice swelling with manufactured emotion. He scanned the crowd, pausing when he spotted Jamal emerging from the house. Jamal stepped onto the stone patio, moving with the stiff, unnatural gait of a man walking to the gallows. His face was the color of wet ash. His eyes were completely hollow, devoid of any joy or excitement. He stood at the very back of the crowd, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring unblinkingly at the stage. Marcus, utterly blinded by his own narcissism, interpreted Jamal's silent shock as overwhelming emotion. "Jamal, you have been my rock since we were children," Marcus said, pointing a dramatic finger at the back of the crowd. "You are a brilliant surgeon, a dedicated husband, and you are going to be a phenomenal father. And to my beautiful sister-in-law, Chloe." Marcus turned to her, his voice dropping to a sickeningly sweet, intimate register. "You have brought so much light into this family. You are carrying the next generation of our bloodline. I could not be more proud to stand beside you both today. This beautiful new home, this incredible gathering, it is all for you." Chloe blushed, pressing a delicate hand to her chest and leaning her head against Marcus's shoulder. The guests cooed in collective admiration. It was a flawless, nauseating performance. Marcus let the applause wash over him before he slowly turned his gaze toward the back of the terrace. He found me standing silently by the catering tables. The warm, loving brother routine instantly vanished, replaced by a sharp, condescending smirk. He saw an opportunity to establish absolute dominance in front of his wealthy peers, a final public humiliation before he filed his divorce papers on Monday. Of course, an event like this does not just happen by magic, Marcus said, lifting the microphone higher. I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge the catering staff. My wife, Maya, and her little team have been working tirelessly in the kitchen all day. A few guests turned in their seats, offering me confused, sympathetic glances. Vivian's smirk widened into a triumphant grin. It is incredibly important to our family to support local grassroots businesses, Marcus continued, his voice dripping with venomous pity. We always believe in giving back to the community. It is genuinely great to see people from the bottom working so hard to pull themselves up. Let us give a hand to the hired help for providing such adequate service today. A smattering of uncomfortable, disjointed golf claps rippled through the crowd. It was the ultimate insult. He was taking a $20 million corporate catering empire, a business that currently funded his entire fraudulent lifestyle, and reducing it to a charity project in front of the most powerful people in the city. He was calling me a peasant at my own expense. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with him. I simply offered a slow, deliberate nod. I let him enjoy his victory. I let him stand on that stage soaking in the false adoration, completely unaware that the ground beneath his expensive Italian loafers was rigged with explosives. I glanced toward the back of the crowd. Jamal was no longer looking at the stage. He was looking directly at me. His hands were trembling at his sides, and the raw, unadulterated hatred burning in his eyes was terrifying. He gave me a single, infinitesimal nod. The doctor had made his diagnosis, and the diagnosis was terminal. The DJ's voice boomed over the speakers, cutting through the lingering awkwardness. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Chloe has prepared a beautiful video montage for us to watch on the big screen before we do the official 10-second countdown. Direct your attention to the monitors. The massive LED screen behind the stage flickered to life, displaying a bright blue background. I wiped my hands on a crisp linen towel and stepped away from the serving station. I walked with calm, measured steps toward the audio-visual booth set up beneath a white canvas canopy on the edge of the lawn. The young technician sitting behind the mixing board looked up, adjusting his headphones. "Excuse me," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant and professional. "The family asked me to load the final presentation file for the big reveal." The technician nodded and stepped aside, gesturing toward the primary input console. I reached deep into the pocket of my white chef's apron. I bypassed the standard catering schedules and vendor invoices. My fingers closed around a heavy encrypted master drive. I pulled it out, the afternoon sun catching the metallic casing. I stepped up to the console and pushed the drive directly into the main projector system. The technician blinked in surprise as my hand bypassed his mixing board. "Ma'am, you cannot touch that equipment," he stammered, reaching nervously for the console. I swatted his hand away with the cold, immovable authority of a woman who was signing his paycheck for the afternoon. The client requested a highly specific last-minute update to the presentation. I said, my eyes never leaving the stage. "Step back and let the system run." He backed away, thoroughly intimidated by my unyielding posture and the steel in my voice. On the acrylic stage, Marcus held a large confetti cannon in his right hand. Chloe held a matching one in her left, giggling as she leaned her head against his shoulder. They looked like a picture-perfect couple straight out of a maternity magazine. "All right, everyone," Marcus shouted into the microphone, his voice booming over the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. "Count it down with us. 10, 9, 8. The wealthy crowd eagerly joined in a chorus of elite manicured voices chanting in unison across the sprawling lawn. 3, 2, 1. Marcus and Chloe twisted the bases of their cannons simultaneously. A pathetic, hollow popping sound echoed across the yard, releasing a meager, sad handful of plain white tissue paper instead of the expected explosion of colored powder. I had personally unscrewed the caps and emptied the colored dye out of the canisters in the kitchen an hour earlier, but the real reveal was happening directly behind them. The massive LED screen did not display a heartwarming montage of ultrasound photos set to acoustic music. It did not flash pastel pink or baby blue. Instead, the screen violently cut to black for a split second before flooding the entire backyard with a blinding aggressive crimson red. It was the exact undeniable shade of a federal warning label. The crowd fell completely silent. The cheerful cheering died instantly in their throats. Marcus turned around, an irritated frown forming on his face, clearly expecting a simple technical error or a faulty wire. The glowing crimson background dissolved into a crisp, high-definition scan of a bank wire transfer log. The text was magnified to a massive scale, perfectly legible even from the furthest tables by the infinity pool. The bold, black letters stretched 20 feet across the screen. Originating account Maya Jenkins Corporate Catering. Destination account Pastel Dreams Holdings LLC. Transfer amount $400,000. Right below the staggering figure, Marcus's forged digital signature was circled in bright, flashing neon yellow. A low, urgent murmur rippled through the audience. These were not gullible people. The lawn was packed with corporate lawyers, investment bankers, and real estate developers. They knew exactly what they were looking at. They recognized the format of a commercial wire transfer, and they immediately recognized the implications of a forged authorization. Before Marcus could even process the image, the slide transitioned automatically. The screen flashed the articles of incorporation for Pastel Dreams Holdings. The sole proprietor listed in undeniable bold typography was Chloe Jenkins. Chloe dropped her empty confetti cannon. It hit the acrylic stage with a sharp clatter that echoed across the silent yard. The rosy color entirely drained from her face. She took a stumbling step backward, raising her hands to her mouth. The final slide loaded with a heavy digital thud. It was the official property deed for the sprawling Milton estate we were currently occupying. The purchase price perfectly matched the stolen $400,000. Above the deed, a single sentence appeared in massive white letters. Financed by stolen funds. Federal wire fraud investigation pending. The silence in the backyard completely shattered, replaced by a wave of sharp gasps and shocked whispers. I watched a state senator lean forward, adjusting his expensive glasses to read the federal fraud warning. A prominent real estate tycoon at the front table pointed at the property deed, whispering frantically to his wife. The elite social circle that Marcus and Vivian prized above absolutely everything else was currently bearing witness to their absolute criminal ruin. Marcus stood frozen on the stage, the microphone hanging loosely in his hand. The arrogant, untouchable smirk he had worn just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. He realized in real time that his secret was no longer just a domestic dispute. He was publicly exposed as an embezzler in front of his most important investors and peers. Chloe began to hyperventilate. The sweet, victimized persona she used to manipulate Jamal was useless against raw financial data. She backed away from the screen as if the glowing documents were physically burning her, looking around wildly for someone to hide behind. Then Vivian broke the paralysis. She shoved her way past the state senator, her face contorted with a frantic, desperate rage. She marched toward the audio-visual booth, her expensive heels sinking into the manicured grass. Her aristocratic composure completely disintegrated, revealing the panicked, clawing desperation of a woman watching her dynasty burn to ash. "Turn it off!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking as she waved her arms frantically at the giant screen. "Turn it off right now! Everyone, please remain calm. It is a glitch. It is just a disgusting technology glitch." She reached the edge of the canopy, glaring at me with murderous intent. She pointed a shaking jewel-encrusted finger directly at my face. "Maya, you miserable, jealous woman!" Vivian screamed, completely ignoring the fact that the entire crowd was watching her melt down. "Turn that screen off this instant. You are making a fool of yourself. Nobody believes this ridiculous fabrication." I looked at Vivian, letting her frantic, shrill voice wash over me. She was desperately trying to maintain the illusion of order, waving her hands at her wealthy friends, as if she could physically sweep the truth under the rug. I did not step away from the audio-visual console. I did not break eye contact with her. "There is no glitch, Vivian," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the immediate murmurs of the crowd. "I am simply providing the transparency this family has always lacked. You wanted a grand reveal. You wanted an unforgettable show for your elite circle. I am giving you exactly what you asked for." Marcus finally broke out of his paralyzed state of terror. He bolted off the acrylic stage, his expensive leather shoes slipping frantically on the damp grass as he sprinted toward the canopy. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged desperation. He lunged for the mixing board, his hands reaching wildly for the tangle of cables connected to the main projector, fully intending to rip the entire system out of the wall. I was faster. I did not reach for the cables. I reached for the master playback control on the digital interface. I slammed my hand down on the large illuminated play button. Marcus managed to rip the video feed cord from its socket, instantly plunging the massive LED screen into darkness. He let out a harsh, breathless sound of triumph, believing he had stopped the bleeding. He believed that taking away the visual evidence would somehow save him. He was completely wrong. The video feed was dead, but the audio cables were routed through an entirely separate heavy-duty amplifier system. The massive concert-grade surround sound speakers rented specifically to project the DJ's music across the sprawling 10,000-square-foot estate emitted a sharp electronic crackle. Then the undeniable crisp audio file I had extracted from Marcus's encrypted cloud server began to play. It was a recorded phone call, a deeply private conversation Marcus had saved on his laptop. Chloe's voice blasted through the manicured backyard. The audio was horrifyingly clear. Her signature breathy, innocent tone was completely absent. Instead, her voice sounded sharp, calculating and dripping with malicious intent. It echoed off the brick facade of the stolen mansion. It bounced off the surface of the infinity pool. It filled the ears of every single politician, surgeon, and socialite standing on the lawn. "I cannot keep pretending to be stressed about money," Chloe's voice reverberated through the venue. "You need to expedite the wire transfer. Maya is entirely focused on her new corporate contracts right now. She is not paying attention to the secondary accounts. Move the 400,000 tomorrow." The crowd stood frozen in a state of collective shock. Several guests instinctively raised their hands to their mouths. A few pulled out their smartphones, the red recording lights blinking steadily as they captured the absolute destruction of the Jenkins family dynasty. Marcus froze, the disconnected video cable dangling limply from his fist. He stared at the speakers in absolute horror. Vivian collapsed into a white wrought iron patio chair, her hands clutching her chest as she realized the true depth of her golden son's depravity. On the recording, Marcus's voice replied, sounding smug and relaxed. "I am moving the funds through the dummy LLC in the morning. Just sign the real estate paperwork for the Milton house. I will handle Maya. She does not suspect a thing." Then came the final devastating blow. The audio clip that would permanently fracture the foundation of their lives. Chloe let out a dark, cruel laugh on the recording. "Jamal still thinks this baby is his," she said, her words slicing through the heavy, humid Georgia air like a scalpel. "He is completely clueless. He actually thanked me for going to the fertility clinic. We just need to keep him distracted for a few more months. Let's drain her dry, Marcus. As soon as I give birth to our child, you take your half of her company and we leave them both with nothing." The audio file ended. A deafening, suffocating silence descended upon the backyard. The jazz trio had stopped playing long ago. The caterers had stopped serving. There was no sound except for the gentle lapping of water in the infinity pool and the ragged, panicked breathing of Marcus Jenkins. I turned my attention away from the console and looked directly at Jamal. He was standing near the edge of the stone patio, exactly where I had left him. The golden child. The brilliant, untouchable surgeon. The man who had sneered at me, threatened to bankrupt my company, and blindly defended the woman who was systematically destroying his life. Jamal's eyes were wide, completely blown out with a mixture of shock and sheer, unadulterated agony. The crystal champagne flute he had been holding loosely in his right hand slipped from his numb fingers. It hit the stone patio with a sharp, violent crash, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. He did not flinch at the sound. He did not look down. He slowly turned his head and stared at Chloe. She was standing near the edge of the stage, her hands clutching her stomach. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She was shaking her head frantically from side to side, silently mouthing the word no over and over again, trying to deny the reality of her own recorded voice. She reached a trembling hand out toward Jamal, taking a pathetic stumbling step in his direction. Jamal recoiled from her as if she were made of fire. The absolute disgust and revulsion radiating from his posture stopped her dead in her tracks. Then Jamal turned his gaze toward Marcus, the brother he had idolized, the brother he had protected, the brother who had slept with his wife, fathered the child she was currently carrying, and plotted to finance their new life with stolen money. The betrayal completely broke Jamal. I watched the rigid, arrogant posture drain out of his body. His broad shoulders slumped forward. The fierce, untouchable pride of the Jenkins family patriarch vanished, replaced by the broken shell of a man who had just realized his entire existence was a humiliating, elaborate joke. He did not yell. He did not attack. He simply stood among the shattered glass, completely destroyed by the truth. The destruction lasted exactly 5 seconds. Then the paralyzing shock evaporated from Jamal's body, leaving behind a terrifying primal wrath. He did not say a word. He did not demand an explanation. He simply moved. Jamal cleared the distance between the patio and the stage in long, predatory strides. His expensive leather shoes crunched over the shattered remains of his champagne glass. Marcus was still standing near the edge of the acrylic platform, staring blankly at the dead LED screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He turned his head just as Jamal hit him. The impact was a violent, breathless collision of bone and muscle. Marcus flew backward off the stage, crashing hard onto the manicured Bermuda grass. Jamal was instantly on top of him. This was not a civilized argument. It was not a sibling rivalry. It was a full-blown, visceral brawl fueled by a lifetime of absolute loyalty that had just been mutated into pure, concentrated hatred. Jamal's fist connected with Marcus's jaw with a sickening crack. Marcus scrambled desperately, throwing his arms up to shield his face, but Jamal tore through his defenses. The tailored pastel linen of Marcus's suit ripped loudly at the shoulder seam. Jamal grabbed his brother by the lapels, lifting his torso halfway off the ground before slamming him back into the dirt. "You sat at my table!" Jamal roared, his voice tearing at his vocal cords, a sound entirely stripped of his usual refined composure. "You looked me in the eye and let me thank you for the clinic. You smiled at me," Marcus sputtered, spitting a mixture of saliva and blood onto the expensive grass. "Jamal, please." Marcus gasped, his voice high and reedy, completely devoid of his signature arrogance. "Wait. Let me explain." Jamal did not let him explain. He delivered another punishing blow to Marcus's cheekbone. Vivian shrieked from the sidelines. Her aristocratic facade had entirely burned away. She stood frozen by the white rose arrangements, watching her golden boys destroy the family name in the dirt. "Security." Vivian screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "Someone get security. Pull them apart." The private security team hired for the event shifted uncomfortably near the perimeter of the lawn, but they did not intervene. They looked at the massive dark screen that had just broadcast federal wire fraud. They looked at the sheer, uncontrolled violence radiating from Jamal. They made the collective silent decision that they were not paid enough to step between two wealthy men, tearing their own empire apart. Chloe realized the exact moment Marcus lost the fight. She saw the blood on his teeth. She saw that her protector, her meal ticket, and the man who had promised her a mansion and a brand new life was currently being beaten into the ground. Panic seized her throat. The sweet, innocent persona she utilized to manipulate every situation kicked into overdrive. She turned away from the brawl and threw herself toward the audience. "Please," Chloe wailed, dropping to her knees at the very edge of the stage. Tears spilled perfectly down her cheeks, her chest heaving as she hyperventilated. "Someone stop him! He is going to kill Marcus!" She reached a trembling, desperate hand out toward the front row of guests. When nobody moved to comfort her, she immediately pivoted to her ultimate weapon. She weaponized her fragility. "It is a lie," Chloe cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. She pointed a shaking finger across the lawn, aiming directly at the audio-visual booth where I stood. "Maya faked all of this. She hired someone to forge those bank records. That audio was AI. She is a bitter, angry woman, and she is framing us because Marcus is leaving her. You have to believe me. Look at what she is doing to this family." She waited for the outrage. She waited for the wealthy, influential men to rush to her aid. She waited for the women to wrap their arms around her and protect the pregnant, frightened victim from the volatile, jealous wife. The crowd did absolutely nothing. The guests occupying the Milton estate were the upper echelon of Atlanta's black elite. They were chief of surgery directors, federal judges, defense attorneys, and venture capitalists. They were highly educated, deeply perceptive people who had spent the last 14 months tolerating Chloe's presence with polite, icy boundaries. They remembered her reaching out to touch their braided hair without permission at country club luncheons. They remembered her tone-deaf, condescending comments regarding inner-city charity initiatives. They remembered the subtle, insidious microaggressions she deployed whenever she felt slightly inconvenienced. They knew exactly who Chloe Jenkins was, and they knew exactly what she was trying to do. She was deploying the classic defense mechanism of white tears, attempting to paint me as the aggressive, dangerous black woman to save her own skin. A prominent defense attorney in the front row crossed her arms over her chest, her expression turning to absolute stone. The state senator's wife looked down at Chloe sobbing on the grass, then deliberately turned her back. One by one, the entire crowd mirrored the gesture. The elite circle literally and figuratively turned their backs on Chloe. They sipped their champagne. They adjusted their designer sunglasses. They began murmuring quietly among themselves about the incoming federal indictments. They left her kneeling on the stage, entirely exposed and completely ignored. Her ultimate defense mechanism had spectacularly failed. On the lawn, Marcus managed to shove his knee against Jamal's chest, creating a fraction of space between them. Marcus was bleeding heavily from his nose, his pristine white shirt ruined with grass stains and crimson spots. "Jamal, listen to me," Marcus pleaded, crying real, pathetic tears as he scrambled backward in the dirt. "It was her. She manipulated me. Chloe planned the whole thing. It was her idea to use the dummy corporation to buy the house. She said we needed a clean break." Chloe stopped crying instantly. Her head snapped toward Marcus. The desperate sobbing victim vanished, replaced by a woman staring at the man who had just thrown her directly under the bus to save his own life. The alliance was dead. There is no loyalty among thieves when the walls cave in. I stepped out from beneath the canvas canopy of the audio-visual booth. I smoothed my hands down the front of my white chef's apron. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply watched the ashes of their empire settle over the lawn. Vivian was now on her knees near the patio, weeping into her hands, mourning the absolute destruction of her social standing. Jamal stood over his brother, his chest heaving, his fists clenched, looking at Marcus as if he were a stranger. The perfect afternoon had fully dissolved into a crime scene. Then, cutting through the sound of Jamal's ragged breathing and Chloe's genuine terrified silence, a new sound emerged. It started as a faint, sharp wail in the distance, echoing over the lake and vibrating through the dense Georgia pine trees. The sound grew louder, piercing and undeniable. I had not just brought the evidence to the party. I had submitted the complete, unedited folder of forged signatures and unauthorized wire transfers to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI 4 hours before the catering vans ever arrived. Bright red and blue lights began to flash through the massive wrought iron gates at the front of the estate. The sirens were here. The wailing sirens abruptly cut out as a convoy of black SUVs and marked police cruisers swarmed the circular driveway. Heavy car doors slammed in rapid succession. The rhythmic thud of tactical boots marching across the imported Italian stone walkway echoed through the eerie silence of the backyard. The crowd of Atlanta elites parted instantly. They stepped back in complete unison, pulling their designer silk dresses and tailored linen suits away from the incoming tide of law enforcement. 4 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI across the back marched onto the terrace, flanked by 6 local police officers. The sharp contrast of tactical gear cutting through a pastel baby shower was a stark, brutal reality check. Marcus looked up from the grass. The blood drained from his bruised face, leaving him the color of chalk. His survival instinct finally overrode his shock. He scrambled backward, his hands desperately clawing at the dirt. He pushed himself to his feet, turning his body toward the manicured hedge maze that led to the rear golf course. He was going to run. He was going to abandon his pregnant mistress, abandon his stolen mansion, and flee to save his own skin. He did not make it 2 steps. Jamal moved with the brutal, precise efficiency of a surgeon. He lunged forward and grabbed Marcus by the collar of his ruined shirt. He slammed Marcus back into the ground with bone-jarring force. Jamal planted his knee squarely in the center of Marcus's chest, pinning him tightly to the earth. "Let me go," Marcus hissed, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze as he thrashed helplessly under his brother's weight. "Jamal, they will take everything. You have to let me run." Jamal stared down at the man who had destroyed his life. "You already took everything from me," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a freezing, dead monotone. "You are not walking away from this. You are going to stay right here and face exactly what you are." I watched from the shadow of the audio-visual canopy. I did not smile. I did not cheer. I simply stood with my arms crossed, watching the inevitable violent collision of truth and consequence. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man with a stern face, stepped up to the edge of the patio. He looked down at the 2 brothers grappling in the dirt. He pulled a folded piece of paper from the inner pocket of his windbreaker. Marcus Jenkins, the agent, announced, his voice carrying effortlessly over the silent crowd. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest." Marcus stopped struggling. He lay flat on the grass, his chest heaving, staring up at the agent with wide, terrified eyes. The fight completely drained out of his body. "You are being charged with 3 counts of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud." The agent continued, reading directly from the warrant. "These charges stem from the unauthorized transfer of $400,000 across state lines and the forging of digital signatures belonging to Maya Jenkins." "Officers, get him up." 2 local police officers stepped forward. Jamal slowly stood up, stepping back to let the officers take his place. They hauled Marcus to his feet, roughly pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the yard. The sound was definitive. The sound was final. Marcus's knees buckled slightly, but the officers held him up by his elbows, treating the former golden child of Atlanta society like a common street criminal. Vivian let out a guttural, heartbroken wail. She tried to rush forward, her hands reaching out for her favorite son, but a police officer firmly blocked her path. She collapsed against him, sobbing uncontrollably, mourning the death of the Jenkins family reputation right there on the lawn. Chloe watched the steel cuffs lock around Marcus's wrists. Her survival instincts kicked in with vicious speed. The sweet, loving partner vanished entirely. She immediately began to back away from Marcus, putting as much physical distance between them as possible. She turned her tear-streaked face toward the lead federal agent, clasping her hands together in a posture of desperate innocence. "Officer, please," Chloe cried, her voice trembling perfectly. "You have to understand, I had absolutely no idea. He lied to me. He manipulated me. He told me the money came from his personal savings. I am just a pregnant woman. I trusted him. He forced me to sign those papers. Maya faked this. She is a bitter, angry woman, and she is framing us because Marcus is leaving her. I am completely innocent in all of this." Marcus jerked his head up, staring at Chloe in absolute disbelief. He opened his mouth to scream at her to expose her lies, but the lead agent simply held up a hand. A second federal agent stepped forward. It was a woman with a sharp, no-nonsense expression. She did not look at Chloe with pity. She looked at her with the cold, calculating gaze of someone who had spent weeks reviewing offshore bank statements. "Chloe Jenkins," the female agent said, stepping onto the acrylic stage. The white rose arrangements framed them perfectly. "Save the victim routine for your defense attorney." Chloe froze, her hands dropping to her sides. We have a warrant for your arrest as well, the agent stated, pulling a second pair of handcuffs from her belt. No, Chloe gasped, taking another step back. You cannot do this. I am pregnant. I did not do anything wrong. You are listed as the sole proprietor of Pastel Dreams Holdings LLC, the agent continued, her voice relentless and clear. You personally authorized the receipt of the stolen $400,000. Your signature is on the fraudulent property deed, and we have recorded communications proving you were an active, willing participant in the embezzlement scheme. You are being charged as a co-conspirator in federal money laundering. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around Chloe's wrists with a harsh ratcheting sound. She let out a sharp gasp, her eyes darting wildly toward the crowd of Atlanta elite, begging for a savior who would never come. The federal agent spun her around seamlessly, reading her Miranda rights in a board-practiced monotone. The reality of the situation crashed down upon the lawn, heavy and suffocating. The golden couple was being hauled away in shackles. Vivian could not process the sight of her family being treated like common criminals on the lawn of their multi-million-dollar estate. The shock that had temporarily paralyzed her finally burned away, replaced entirely by the toxic, entitled arrogance that had defined her entire existence. She pushed herself up from the white wrought-iron chair. She smoothed down the front of her expensive silk dress, lifted her chin, and marched directly toward the lead FBI agent. She inserted herself aggressively between the officer and Marcus. "Take those off of him immediately," Vivian ordered. She did not ask, she commanded. Her voice was sharp and shrill, echoing across the silent patio. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? I am Vivian Jenkins. My late husband built half the hospitals in this state. The men standing on this lawn play golf with the governor. I will have your badge, your pension, and your entire career by Monday morning." The federal agent did not even blink. He looked at Vivian with the tired, immovable patience of a man who dealt with corrupt, wealthy criminals every single day of his life. "Ma'am, step away from the suspect," the agent said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion or intimidation. "If you interfere with a federal arrest, you will be placed in the back of that cruiser right next to him." Vivian scoffed, completely insulted by his lack of deference. She turned back to the crowd, raising her hands to rally her influential friends. "Senator Davis, tell this man to release my son," she demanded. "Judge Roberts, do something." Senator Davis, the man who had been sipping premium champagne and laughing at Marcus's jokes just an hour ago, suddenly found his shoes incredibly fascinating. He turned his back entirely and began walking swiftly toward the valet station. Judge Roberts did the exact same thing. The rest of the elite crowd followed their lead without a single word. They were scattering like roaches in the sudden light, eager to distance their own reputations from a massive federal indictment. Nobody was going to save Vivian Jenkins. Vivian watched her carefully curated social empire abandon her in absolute silence. Her chest heaved as her breathing grew ragged. With no powerful men left to command, she turned her furious, manic gaze toward the only target available. She marched toward me, her eyes blazing with irrational hatred. "You did this," Vivian hissed, stopping mere inches from my face. Her breath smelled of stale champagne and blind panic. "You ungrateful, spiteful woman. You engineered this entire circus just to embarrass us because you could not keep your husband happy. You are going to fix this. You are going to call your lawyers, drop these ridiculous charges, and fix my family right now." I did not step back. I looked at the woman who had spent the last decade treating me like dirt beneath her designer shoes, the woman who had slapped me in my own office and demanded I bow to her superiority. I calmly reached into the deep pocket of my catering apron. I did not pull out a phone to call my lawyers. I pulled out a thick, folded manila envelope. "I cannot fix your family, Vivian," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devastatingly calm. "But I can give you some reading material for the weekend." I held the envelope out toward her. Vivian snatched it from my hand, her manicured fingers ripping the paper open with frantic, trembling aggression. She pulled out a thick stack of legally bound documents. She expected a catering bill. She expected a petty civil lawsuit or a list of demands. She did not expect a notice of default and foreclosure. Vivian stared at the heavy black text printed at the top of the first page. Her eyes flicked rapidly across the paragraphs, failing to comprehend the dense legal jargon. Her brow furrowed in confusion as she looked back up at me. "Let me translate that for you," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the gentle rustle of the evening wind. "Marcus did not just steal $400,000 in cash from my business to buy this mansion. He needed to secure a massive multi-million-dollar line of credit for the rest of the purchase price. No legitimate bank was going to hand that kind of money to a man with his debt-to-income ratio without substantial hard collateral." Vivian's hands began to shake. The heavy parchment paper rattled audibly in her grip. She looked toward Marcus, who was currently being pushed toward the back of a police cruiser. "He forged your signature, Vivian." I continued, dealing the final lethal blow to her reality. "He used your prized ancestral home in Buckhead. He leveraged the house your late husband left you to secure the fraudulent offshore loans for Chloe's new estate. And because the federal government has now officially frozen every single one of his accounts, those loans have completely defaulted." Vivian's jaw dropped. All the color instantly vanished from her face, leaving her looking hollow and gaunt. "The bank owns your house now," I told her, my voice holding zero pity and zero hesitation. "The eviction process has already started. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the property." "No." Vivian whispered the word, barely escaping her tight throat. She whipped her head around to look at Marcus again. "Marcus, tell me this is a lie." Marcus was standing by the open door of the police cruiser. He stopped, struggling against the officers. He looked at his mother for a fraction of a second, his face twisting in shame, and then he looked down at the ground. He was entirely unable to meet her eyes. His silence was a damning, absolute confession. The truth slammed into Vivian with the physical force of a freight train. She was not just losing her social standing today. She was not just losing her golden child to the federal prison system. She was losing her home. She was officially penniless, homeless, and completely stripped of the grand legacy she valued above human life. She had nothing left. The proud, arrogant matriarch completely broke. Her knees simply gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the manicured grass right in front of me, the heavy silk of her dress pooling in the dirt. The foreclosure papers slipped from her fingers and scattered across the lawn. Vivian reached out her hands, desperately grabbing the hem of my white apron. She looked up at me, her face completely ruined by tears and panic. The woman who had demanded I stay in the kitchen like a servant was now groveling at my feet, stripped of all her power and prestige. "Maya, please." Vivian sobbed, her voice a pathetic, broken wheeze. "You have your company. You have money. You can pay off the default. Please, Maya, do not let them take my home. I am begging you. I am so sorry for everything. Forgive us. Please, I will do anything." I looked down at her grasping hands. I felt no triumph, no wild joy, just the cold, clean satisfaction of absolute justice settling into place. I reached down and firmly pried her trembling fingers off my apron, stepping back so she could not touch me again. "Fix your tone, Vivian," I said quietly, looking down into her terrified, weeping eyes. "We aren't in the country club anymore." The sterile fluorescent lights of the Atlanta Federal Holding Facility offered no places to hide. The lavish warmth of the estate was entirely gone, replaced by concrete walls, bolted steel tables, and the relentless mechanical hum of the ventilation system. Marcus sat in interrogation room A. His tailored linen suit was ripped at the shoulder seam and smeared with dirt. The dried blood on his chin had flaked onto his collar. He was sweating profusely, his hands cuffed to the steel bar bolted beneath the table. Across from him sat two federal agents, their faces completely impassive as they watched him unravel. Marcus started talking the second the heavy door closed. His voice was a frantic, desperate babble. He threw Chloe to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. He painted a vivid picture of a calculating, manipulative seductress who had targeted him, compromised his judgment, and masterminded the entire financial scheme. He claimed she held the pregnancy over his head like a loaded gun, threatening to destroy his marriage and his standing in the medical community if he did not fund her lavish lifestyle. He insisted the dummy corporation was entirely her idea. He claimed she had set up the offshore accounts, and he had simply been a foolish, terrified man who transferred his own savings to keep her quiet. He begged the agents to believe that he was the victim of a professional extortionist. 2 doors down in interrogation room C, Chloe was delivering an absolutely flawless performance. Her mascara was perfectly smudged to highlight her wide, terrified eyes. She clutched her pregnant stomach protectively, sobbing violently into a harsh paper towel. She told the female federal agent sitting across from her that Marcus was a controlling, terrifying narcissist. She claimed she was just a naive girl who fell in love completely unaware of his financial crimes. She insisted Marcus handled all the paperwork, forced her to sign documents she did not understand, and kept her isolated and dependent. She sobbed that he had promised her the money came from his legitimate trust fund. She painted herself as the ultimate victim of a powerful, abusive patriarch who was now trying to frame the mother of his unborn child. The federal agents let them talk. They let them spin their desperate, conflicting webs of lies, perfectly content to let them contradict themselves into a corner. Then, the heavy steel door of Marcus's room clicked open. The lead detective stepped inside, followed closely by Nia. Maya's lead attorney did not look like she had just come from a garden party. She looked like an executioner in a slate gray designer suit. Nia carried a thick, leather-bound briefcase. She did not ask for permission to speak. With a nod from the detective, she stepped up to the metal table, popped the golden latches, and began dealing documents across the surface like a blackjack dealer executing a flawless sweep. Nia looked at Marcus with absolute unbridled disgust. She informed him that his victim routine was insulting to every single person in the room. She turned to the lead detective and began walking him through the irrefutable digital trail she and her investigative team had compiled over the last month, systematically dismantling every single lie Marcus and Chloe had just told in their respective rooms. There were the encrypted emails. Nia pointed to the IP address logs showing Marcus logging into Maya's secure business accounts from his personal laptop at 2 in the morning. There were the text messages. Nia pulled out thick transcripts of WhatsApp conversations showing Chloe explicitly instructing Marcus on which offshore routing numbers to use to avoid flagging federal tax algorithms. There were time-stamped geolocation tags proving Chloe was physically present at the notary's office when the fake LLC was registered, actively managing the paperwork. Nia presented the wire transfer authorizations. She pointed out that the dual authentication codes required to move the $400,000 were sent to a burner phone. She then produced the purchase receipt for that exact burner phone, proving it was bought with Chloe's credit card. It was not a case of a mastermind and a naive victim. It was a highly coordinated, mutually beneficial criminal conspiracy. Nia laid out the undeniable proof that they had built their dream life brick by brick, using stolen funds, both of them fully aware of the devastation it would cause Maya and Jamal. Marcus stared at the paper trail blanketing the steel table. His mouth went completely dry. The frantic energy drained out of his body, leaving behind a hollow, paralyzing dread. The meticulously crafted lies he had just spent an hour spinning were destroyed in less than 3 minutes by a stack of printed digital receipts. He looked up at Nia, then at the federal agents. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He tried to formulate another excuse, another angle, another lie, but his mind was entirely blank. The suffocating reality of the concrete room was finally setting in. The lead detective leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the metal table. He looked at Marcus with a cold, predatory calm. He tapped a specific document near the center of the table. He informed Marcus that the digital trail was just the supporting evidence. The primary charge was entirely sealed. The detective stated that Marcus's frantic attempt to blame his mistress was completely irrelevant because the most severe crime had his fingerprints all over it. The detective slid a high-resolution scan of the property deed toward Marcus. He pointed a thick finger at the signature line. He informed Marcus that the FBI had not just taken Maya's word for it. They had brought in a federal forensic handwriting analyst hours before the police cruisers ever arrived at the estate. The expert had analyzed the pressure points, the stroke velocity, and the digital overlay of the signature on the Milton estate deed. The detective leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. He told Marcus that the forensic expert had already proven the signature was a blatant amateur forgery. He confirmed that they had the server logs showing Marcus had personally logged into the digital notary portal using Maya's stolen password. The detective leaned back, letting the heavy silence stretch out to an agonizing length. He then informed Marcus that federal wire fraud combined with aggravated identity theft and bank fraud carried mandatory minimums. Marcus was facing 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. 72 hours after that interrogation, the reality of a 15-year federal sentence had completely stripped away whatever remnants of arrogance Marcus had left. The sharp, polished surgeon was entirely gone. The Fulton County Jail Visitor Center was a bleak, windowless concrete box illuminated by harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights. It smelled faintly of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and sheer despair. I sat perfectly still at the bolted steel table wearing an immaculate tailored emerald green blazer. I did not check my watch. I simply waited. The heavy metal door at the far end of the room groaned open. A correctional officer led Marcus inside. The sight of him was jarring. He was drowning in a faded, oversized Orange County jumpsuit. His posture was completely broken. His shoulders slumped forward as if the physical weight of his crimes was crushing his spine. The bruising on his jaw and cheekbone from Jamal's fists had blossomed into ugly, swollen shades of purple and yellow. He shuffled toward the table, his eyes darting nervously around the sterile room before finally landing on me. He sat down heavily on the metal stool, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had chafed his skin. Maya. He breathed, his voice a pathetic, gravelly rasp. You came. I knew you would come. I did not say a word. I simply looked at him, analyzing the desperate, fearful man sitting across from me. He took my silence as an invitation to speak. Please, Maya, you have to help me, Marcus begged, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the cold steel table. The food here is inedible. I have not slept in 3 days. My cellmate is unstable. You made your point. You proved that you are smarter than me. You completely destroyed me in front of the entire city. But you have to drop the civil suit. I maintained my steady, unbroken gaze. The civil suit I had filed concurrently with the federal indictment was designed to freeze every single one of his personal and professional assets. It was a secondary layer of absolute financial destruction. The feds have frozen all of my accounts. Marcus continued, his voice cracking with genuine panic. I cannot afford a private defense attorney. I am being represented by a public defender who looks like he just graduated law school. If you keep the civil suit active, I cannot liquidate anything to pay for decent representation. I am begging you, Maya. Drop the civil damages. I will do whatever you want. I will sign anything you want. Just give me a chance to fight the federal charges. I slowly unclasped the golden latches of my leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, meticulously drafted legal document. I placed it on the steel table. I placed a heavy silver fountain pen right on top of it. I slid the entire stack across the table until it rested directly in front of his folded hands. You said you would sign anything, I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any sympathy or hesitation. Marcus looked down at the document. His bruised eyes scanned the bold black text printed at the very top of the page. It was a masterfully aggressive divorce decree. Let us be very clear about how this is going to work. Marcus, I instructed, leaning back in my chair, you are going to sign that document exactly as it is written. You are going to formally relinquish any and all claims to my tech company, my personal savings, and the primary residence. You are going to waive any right to spousal support or alimony. Furthermore, you are going to accept full, singular liability for the fraudulent loans you acquired to fund Chloe's dream house. Marcus stared at the paper in absolute horror. He looked up at me, his jaw trembling. Maya, this leaves me with absolutely nothing. You are stripping me of every single asset I have ever earned. This puts me millions of dollars in debt. I am simply formalizing the reality of your situation, I replied smoothly. You are already facing a 15-year federal sentence for wire fraud. You are entirely ruined. If you do not sign that decree right now, I will not only proceed with the civil suit, but I will drag out the divorce proceedings for years. I will bleed you dry in civil court before your federal trial even begins. You will rot in this county jail without a dime to your name. Sign the papers, Marcus." He stared at me, searching my face for any flicker of the loving, forgiving wife he had manipulated for years. He found nothing but cold, hardened steel. He looked back down at the divorce decree. His breathing grew shallow and erratic. He realized he was completely trapped. He had no leverage, no power, and no alternative. With a shaking, defeated hand, Marcus picked up the silver fountain pen. He flipped to the final page of the document. He pressed the nib to the paper and signed his name legally, surrendering his entire existence. He slid the papers back across the table, his shoulders dropping even lower in ultimate defeat. He let out a long, ragged exhale. "Okay," Marcus whispered, staring blankly at the metal table. "It is done. I signed everything over to you. Now drop the civil suit so I can at least sell the classic cars to pay for a real lawyer." I picked up the signed divorce decree. I neatly stacked the pages, checking his signature to ensure it was perfectly legible. I slid the document safely back into my leather briefcase and secured the golden latches with a sharp, satisfying snap. I stood up from the bolted steel chair and looked down at my newly minted ex-husband. "I am not dropping the civil suit, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing coldly off the concrete walls. Marcus's head snapped up. His eyes went wide with sheer terror. "But I signed the papers," he shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You said you would let me liquidate the cars. I never said that," I corrected him, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. "You assumed that. I simply told you to sign the papers. And regarding your prized classic car collection, you do not need to worry about liquidating them." I picked up my briefcase, giving him one final merciless look. "Flatbed tow trucks arrived at your climate-controlled storage warehouse 2 hours ago," I informed him, watching the absolute despair wash over his bruised face. "Nia secured an emergency asset forfeiture order this morning. Your vintage Porsches and that pristine Shelby Mustang have already been impounded. I am seizing the entire collection to cover my legal fees. Enjoy the public defender, Marcus." I left the Fulton County Jail without looking back. The heavy steel doors echoed shut behind me, sealing Marcus inside the concrete tomb he had built for himself. I walked out into the blinding Georgia sunlight, climbed into the back of my waiting car, and gave my driver the address to a quiet, discreet coffee shop in Buckhead. I had one final loose end to tie up. Jamal was already sitting at a secluded corner table when I arrived. The contrast between the man sitting before me and the arrogant, untouchable surgeon from the garden party was staggering. The tailored Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a simple dark cashmere sweater. The fierce, judgmental pride that usually radiated from his posture had entirely evaporated. He looked exhausted. He looked 10 years older. He looked like a man who had survived a hurricane but lost everything he owned in the wreckage. He stood up as I approached, pulling out my chair with quiet, humbled respect. We sat in silence for a long moment while the barista placed our coffees on the table. Jamal stared down at his dark roast, tracing the rim of the ceramic mug with his index finger. "I owe you an apology," Maya Jamal said, his voice stripped of all its former condescension. He looked up, meeting my eyes with raw, unfiltered sincerity. "I was completely blind. I let my loyalty to my brother cloud my judgment. I treated you like an enemy when you were the only person in that house actually telling the truth. I am deeply, profoundly sorry." I accepted his apology with a slow nod. I did not need his validation anymore, but hearing the golden child of the Jenkins family finally admit his absolute failure was a necessary step in burying the past. I asked him how he was holding up in the aftermath of the federal indictments. Jamal let out a dry, humorless laugh. He reached inside his jacket pocket and pulled out a thin white envelope. He did not hand it to me immediately. He held it between his palms, staring at it as if it were a live grenade. Everyone at that party thought the shock of the audio recording paralyzed me because of the betrayal, Jamal said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They thought I froze because I was trying to process the fact that my wife was sleeping with my brother. That was only half the truth. The real shock was the confirmation of a lie I had been carrying for 5 years. He slid the envelope across the table. I opened it and pulled out a stack of medical documents. They were heavily redacted, stamped with the seal of a highly exclusive private clinic in Switzerland. "I am sterile," Maya Jamal stated flatly. The words hung in the quiet air of the coffee shop, heavy and absolute. I suffered a severe medical complication during a surgical residency in my late 20s. The resulting infection left me with a 0% chance of ever fathering a child naturally. I never told anyone. I never told Vivian. I certainly never told Marcus. The Jenkins family legacy demands perfection, and I refuse to be viewed as defective. I kept it a completely buried secret. I looked down at the medical records in my hands, the pieces of the puzzle rapidly clicking into place. When Chloe came to me, crying tears of joy, claiming she was pregnant, I knew instantly it was a physical impossibility. Jamal continued, his eyes darkening with a cold, terrifying clarity. I knew she was lying, but I did not know who the father was, and I did not know how deep the manipulation went. If I had confronted her privately, she would have spun a web of lies. She would have gone to Vivian. She would have played the victim, filed for a lucrative divorce, and dragged my medical history into the public record to save herself. Jamal leaned forward, his hands clasping the edge of the table. "When you played that audio file over the speakers, I did not just hear my brother plotting to steal your money," Jamal explained, his voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal intensity. "I heard the undeniable proof I needed to destroy her completely. The public humiliation was a gift, Maya. You handed me the exact weapon I needed. You gave me the justification to cut her off entirely without Vivian or the society circles ever blaming me or questioning my masculinity. I walked straight from your party to a private laboratory and expedited a mandatory fetal DNA test under the threat of a massive lawsuit. The results came back yesterday. The child belongs to Marcus. I absorbed the sheer weight of his confession. Jamal had weaponized my revenge to execute his own. We had both been bleeding out in the Jenkins family mansion, but we had both managed to wield the knife in the end. I slid the medical records back into the envelope and handed them across the table. I asked him what his next move was regarding his soon-to-be ex-wife. Jamal took a slow sip of his coffee. A chilling, satisfied smile spread across his face, completely altering his exhausted features. "Chloe thought she could fall back on her maiden name," Jamal said, his tone dripping with absolute satisfaction. "She always bragged about her pristine upper-crust family in Charleston. She thought they would protect her. But the federal indictments hit the national news cycle at 6 o'clock this morning. The charges of wire fraud and money laundering are plastered across every major financial network in the country. Her family is obsessed with their pristine public image." Jamal leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "She called her father crying for bail money." Jamal revealed, his eyes locking onto mine. "He told her she was a disgrace. He told her she had permanently ruined their social standing. He hung up the phone and completely disowned her. Chloe is sitting in a federal holding cell, Maya. She has no access to my accounts. She has no access to Marcus. And now she has no family. She is entirely, permanently alone. The wheels of federal justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Over the next 8 months, the Jenkins family name was systematically dragged through the mud, dissected by every major news outlet, financial blog, and society column in Atlanta. The spectacular implosion of their carefully curated dynasty became the city's favorite cautionary tale of greed and supreme arrogance. Marcus stood before a federal judge in a sterile wood-paneled courtroom for his sentencing. He was completely stripped of the bespoke Italian suits and the untouchable aura of a top-tier surgeon. He wore a faded standard-issue orange jumpsuit. His public defender, overwhelmed and outmatched by the sheer volume of forensic evidence Naya had provided, had failed to secure any sort of leniency. The judge looked down from the bench with absolute disgust, citing the predatory nature of Marcus's financial crimes and his blatant lack of remorse. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with a resounding crack. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in a high-security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Simultaneously, the state medical board permanently revoked his surgical license. The golden child was officially a convicted felon, locked in an 8 by 10 concrete cell, surrounded by men who did not care about his pedigree or his past wealth. Chloe's descent into ruin was equally brutal. After being entirely disowned by her wealthy, image-obsessed family in Charleston, she found herself completely isolated. Without Marcus's stolen funds, and without her family's protection, she was forced to face the federal prosecutors alone. Terrified of giving birth in a federal prison, she accepted a devastating plea deal. She confessed to her role as a willing co-conspirator in the offshore money laundering scheme. She avoided a prison cell, but the terms of her freedom were crushing. Chloe was sentenced to 10 years of strict house arrest and ordered to pay $500,000 in mandatory federal restitution. The lavish mansion she had demanded was gone. The designer maternity clothes were sold to pay her legal fees. She was forced to relocate to a rusted aluminum-sided trailer in a dusty, forgotten park on the outskirts of a rural county. A bulky black GPS ankle monitor was tightly strapped around her leg, constantly chafing her skin and reminding her that she was property of the state. She gave birth to Marcus's child, entirely alone in a cramped linoleum-floored room, surrounded by the constant deafening roar of highway traffic. There were no caterers, no silk ribbons, and no elite friends coming to visit. She was trapped in the exact kind of poverty she had spent her entire life trying to escape, burdened with crushing debt and a child she could barely afford to feed. But the most poetic justice belonged to Vivian. The bank moved with ruthless efficiency following the default on the fraudulent loans. Vivian was formally evicted from the sprawling Buckhead estate she had prized above human decency. The moving company hauled her few remaining personal possessions onto the curb. When she reached out to her wealthy friends, the women she had hosted at luncheons and galas for decades, she found her phone numbers blocked. The country club immediately revoked her membership due to unpaid dues and the stain of the federal indictments. Without Marcus to fund her extravagant lifestyle and with the ancestral home repossessed, Vivian was officially bankrupt. For the first time in her pampered, arrogant life, Vivian Jenkins had to get a job to survive. She found employment at a massive, aggressively lit discount retail store in a working-class suburb. The woman who used to sneer at service workers and demand the manager for the slightest inconvenience was now forced to wear a stiff royal blue polyester vest over a cheap cotton shirt. A bright yellow plastic name tag was pinned to her chest. She stood at the automatic sliding doors for 8 hours a day under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. Her feet, used to the soft leather of designer heels, swelled and ached in heavy orthopedic sneakers. Vivian was required to smile and greet every single customer who walked through the doors. She had to hand out sales flyers to the exact demographic of everyday hardworking people she had spent her entire life looking down upon. Occasionally, a former acquaintance from her society days would walk into the store looking for cheap holiday decorations or bulk supplies. Vivian would try to turn her face away, her cheeks burning with hot, suffocating humiliation, but there was nowhere to hide. She was trapped in a polyester uniform, a public monument to her own spectacular downfall. I watched this final scene unfold from the tinted window of my chauffeured car. My driver had pulled into the sprawling asphalt parking lot of the retail store to pick up an order of specialized bulk shipping supplies for my tech company. I sat comfortably in the supple leather seat, holding a sleek tablet detailing the record-breaking quarterly profits of my enterprise. I looked out the window and saw Vivian pushing a line of metal shopping carts across the damp asphalt. Her shoulders were hunched against the chilly afternoon wind. Her face was lined with deep, bitter exhaustion. She looked up for a fraction of a second, her tired eyes catching the reflection of my pristine black car, but she did not see me behind the dark glass. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no lingering anger. I felt nothing but a clean, cold, and absolute closure. I had not just survived the Jenkins family. I had entirely dismantled them. They had tried to steal my life, my money, and my dignity, and in return, I had handed them the exact reality they deserved. I tapped the glass partition, signaling my driver to pull out of the lot. I did not look back at Vivian as the car merged onto the highway, driving away from the wreckage of their lives and accelerating smoothly toward my own future. Exactly 1 year after that car ride, I was no longer accelerating toward an uncertain future. I had arrived. My driver navigated the sleek black sedan through the bustling heart of downtown Atlanta, pulling to a gentle stop over the immaculate cobblestone driveway of my new corporate headquarters. The building was a magnificent 60-story marvel of geometric glass and dark steel that reflected the city lights like a towering monument to ambition. It was not leased space. I held the deed to the entire structure purchased free and clear, with the exponentially multiplied profits of my tech platform and my catering empire. I stepped out of the vehicle, smoothing the fabric of my custom-tailored midnight blue evening gown. The humid Georgia air clung to my skin, but tonight it felt electric, charged with the thrumming energy of absolute victory. I bypassed the crowded main lobby, stepping into my private glass elevator and pressing the button for the penthouse level. The doors slid silently apart, revealing a sprawling multi-level event space that took my breath away. This was the official launch gala celebrating the national expansion of my company, and the atmosphere was nothing short of intoxicating. It was a visceral, vibrant rejection of every suffocating, stale country club dinner Vivian had ever forced me to endure. There were no rigid seating charts, no judgmental whispers from old money matrons clinging to decaying legacies, and absolutely no fake tight-lipped smiles hiding malicious intent. Instead, the room was a brilliant, breathing tapestry of unapologetic Black excellence. The space was packed with hundreds of the most innovative self-made entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and creative minds in the country. Men in sharp avant-garde suits and women in breathtaking couture moved freely across the polished marble floors. A 10-piece band played a flawless, upbeat fusion of contemporary jazz and rhythmic Afrobeat, filling the high-ceilinged room with a tempo that made the very walls feel alive. I walked down the sweeping glass staircase into the main hall, instantly enveloped by the warmth of genuine celebration. Waiters moved seamlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with culinary masterpieces produced entirely by my own catering company. The very business that Marcus had patronized and Vivian had openly mocked as a lowly servant's hobby was now exclusively servicing the most elite high-net-worth innovators in the state. I watched my guests savoring the seared Wagyu crostinis and the perfectly spiced crab beignets, their faces lighting up with genuine delight. Everywhere I looked, I saw authentic joy. People were laughing deeply from their chests, exchanging brilliant ideas, and forging partnerships that would change industries. There was a mutual, unspoken understanding among everyone in the room. We had all bled for our success, and tonight we were reveling in the harvest. Near the center of the room, standing beside a breathtaking, cascading champagne tower, I spotted Nia. My fiercely loyal lead attorney looked like an absolute force of nature in a striking crimson gown that commanded just as much respect as her imposing courtroom suits. When she saw me approaching, a rare, genuine smile broke across her usually ruthless features. She reached out, pulling me into a warm, congratulatory embrace that spoke volumes without a single word. We did not need to discuss the pathetic reality of Marcus rotting in a federal cell. We did not need to waste our breath talking about Chloe's ankle monitor or Vivian's tragic retail uniform. Those people were ghosts banished entirely from my narrative by Nia's brilliant, merciless legal strategy. Nia stepped back, raising her crystal flute in a silent, victorious salute. She toasted to my brilliance, acknowledging the sheer grit it took to launch my platform into 30 major cities across the nation simultaneously. We clinked our glasses together, the delicate crystal chiming brightly over the vibrant music, sealing a partnership built on trust, strategy, and absolute triumph. The celebration continued to swell, a beautiful, overwhelming symphony of life and ambition. But I needed a quiet moment to anchor myself in the profound reality of what I had achieved. I smiled warmly at a group of investors, excused myself from the center of the room, and walked toward the massive glass doors leading out to the private penthouse terrace. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. The noise of the gala faded into a pleasant, muffled hum behind the thick, soundproof glass. I walked slowly to the edge of the balcony, resting my hands against the smooth, chilled stone railing. The entire city of Atlanta stretched out endlessly beneath me, an ocean of glittering lights and pulsing arteries of traffic. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the cool wind brush against my face. A year ago, I had been standing on the manicured lawn of a fraudulent estate, watching federal agents dismantle the grand illusion of my marriage. I had been facing the complete destruction of my life, surrounded by parasites who wanted nothing more than to see me fail and strip me of my dignity. I had been dragged into the mud by people who believed their fabricated pedigree made them untouchable. Now I was standing on top of a skyscraper that belonged entirely to me, looking down at a city I had conquered on my own terms. I had excised the rot from my life with surgical precision, turning the worst betrayal imaginable into the very foundation of my empire. I raised my glass of vintage champagne, holding it up against the backdrop of the illuminated horizon, feeling the absolute unshakable power of a woman who had survived the fire and emerged forged in steel. They thought they could steal my crown because I built it with my own two hands instead of inheriting it. But what they didn't realize is that when you build the castle yourself, you know exactly which pillars to pull to watch it crash down on your enemies. The ultimate lesson from Maya's journey is that true power and security are forged through independence, not inherited privilege or toxic validation. When you build your own foundation, no one can tear it down. Marcus, Chloe, and Vivian relied entirely on deception and entitlement to sustain their illusions of grandeur. In contrast, Maya used meticulous calculation, patience, and unshakable boundaries to dismantle their facade. It proves that the most devastating revenge isn't an emotional outburst, but letting the natural consequences of toxic people's own actions destroy them while you thrive. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relationships to protect your peace and build your own empire? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of ultimate triumph.